I grew up on a quiet cul-de-sac where everyone seemed to know each other. Kids played tag in the evenings, and the parents would gather on weekends to barbecue. From the outside, it was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed of moving into. But beneath that surface of safety, there was one house that never quite fit in. The one across from mine, where Mr. Gibbons lived. He was older, maybe in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair and a limp. To most neighbors, he was just a lonely man who kept to himself. To me, he became something much darker. When I was about 15, I started noticing strange things. Sometimes, when I was doing homework late at night, I'd see movement through my window. Looking across the street, I could spot a dim light flickering in Mr. Gibbons' basement. The odd part wasn't just the light, it was the shadow. I could see a figure pacing back and forth, stopping every so often, as though it were listening. I told myself maybe he was tinkering with tools or repairing something, but it never sat right with me. The first time it got truly unsettling was one night in July. I had trouble sleeping and got up to get some water. As I passed my window, I froze. Mr. Gibbons was standing outside his house in complete darkness, not moving, just staring directly at my bedroom. His porch light was off, and I could barely see his face, but I knew he was looking straight at me. My body locked up, and for several minutes I stood frozen, hoping he'd just go inside. Finally, he turned and walked back slowly into the shadows of his home. After that, it became a pattern. At least once or twice a week, I'd wake up to find him standing outside in the middle of the night. He never waved. He never called out. He just stared. I stopped opening my blinds because I couldn't handle seeing his figure anymore. Still, sometimes I felt the weight of his gaze, even when I couldn't see it, like he was there watching whether or not I checked. Things escalated when my parents went out of town for a weekend trip, leaving me home alone. I had the house to myself, and at first it felt freeing. But around 2 a.m, I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was scratching, faint at first, then sharper, like nails dragging across drywall. It was coming from inside my bedroom wall. I sat up, heart hammering, listening as the sound grew louder, then stopped suddenly. That's when I heard something far worse. A muffled laugh, low and breathy, vibrating through the wall. I bolted from my bed and called the police, trying to explain between shaky breaths what I had heard. They came within 20 minutes and searched the house. They checked the basement, the attic, every closet. Nothing. They told me it was probably just an animal in the walls. I felt embarrassed, like I'd wasted their time. But when I returned to my room, I noticed something odd. It's behind my dresser. The paint on the wall didn't match perfectly with the rest. It looked newer, patched over. When my dad returned, I begged him to help me check it. He was reluctant, but finally gave in. He pulled the dresser away and tapped the wall, hollow. He cut into it, peeling back a section of drywall. Behind it was a small space, barely large enough for a crouched adult to squeeze into. Inside, we found old food wrappers, a dirty blanket, and, chillingly, a pair of binoculars. The police were called again, and this time they took it seriously. They searched the area and discovered that someone had been sneaking into our house through a loose basement window. From there, they had cut a hidden entrance into my bedroom wall and had been living in that cramped space, watching me when I slept. My parents were horrified. I was numb. The question was, who? The answer came quicker than expected. Officers arrested Mr. Gibbons later that week. They found evidence linking him to the crawl space in our home. Fingerprints, food packaging that matched trash in his house. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't in our home. It was in his. Inside his basement, they found notebooks, dozens of them, each filled with sketches. Every page contained drawings of me, sleeping in my bed, brushing my teeth, walking to school. He had documented my life in eerie, obsessive detail. And then came the last notebook. The final pages were different. They weren't sketches of me sleeping or living, but they were drawings of me staring at him through the window, eyes wide in fear. He had drawn my reactions from that night, I caught him outside, perfectly capturing my terror. The realization hit me. He had been watching every reaction, every fear, feeding on it. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep in my room. I stayed on the couch, leaving every light on in the house. Even though he was in jail, I felt like he was still there, hiding in the shadows, peering through invisible cracks in the walls. I started having nightmares where I'd wake up and see him standing at the foot of my bed, grinning. The neighborhood tried to move on, pretending it was over, but whispers spread. Some people claimed they had seen him digging in his backyard late at night. Others swore they'd heard screams from his basement, though no one ever reported it until after his arrest. The more stories I heard, the less safe I felt. One night, I woke up to my phone buzzing. It was a message from an unknown number. My stomach dropped when I opened it. It was a photo of me taken through my bedroom window, but I hadn't opened my blinds in weeks. The timestamp showed it was taken just hours earlier. Police swore Gibbons was still in custody, awaiting trial, but someone had taken that photo. Someone who knew the house. Someone who knew me. I never found out who sent it, and maybe I don't want to. All I know is I still sleep with the blinds closed. And sometimes, I swear, I hear scratching inside the walls again. Back in college, I rented a cheap apartment in a building that had clearly seen better days. The wallpaper was peeling, the elevators never worked, and the hallways always smelled faintly of mold. It wasn't glamorous, but it was affordable, and as a student, that was all that mattered. At first, I thought my biggest problems would be the thin walls or the noisy plumbing. I had no idea my neighbor would become the real nightmare. She lived in the apartment directly next to mine. Her name was Celia, though I only learned that later from the landlord. She was probably in her late 40s, with messy black hair and sunken eyes that seemed too wide when she looked at you. I remember the first time I saw her. She stood in the hallway, staring as I carried boxes into my unit. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a greeting, just watched. At first, I brushed it off as harmless curiosity, but her behavior quickly escalated. She'd appear at odd times, standing outside her door when I was coming home late, asking me strange questions. Do you usually stay out this late? What floor do your classes end on? Do you ever forget to lock your door? It's the way she asked made my skin crawl, like she wasn't making conversation, but collecting information. One night, I returned home around midnight after a long study session. As I slid my key into the lock, I noticed her door was cracked open. I froze when I realized I was visible in the gap, staring directly at me. No movement, no words, just silent observation. I rushed into my apartment and locked the door, my pulse racing. Seconds later, I heard soft footsteps outside. "Okay," and then her voice whispering through the crack under my door. "Good night." From that point, started dreading being in my own apartment. At night, I'd hear tapping on the shared wall. Sometimes it was faint, rhythmic. Other times, it was frantic, like fingernails clawing at the plaster. More than once, I woke to soft humming coming through the wall, a low tune that sent shivers through me. When I complained to the landlord, he just sighed and said, "Celia's a little strange, but harmless." Things escalated when I noticed a small hole in my bathroom wall. At first, I assumed it was water damage, but when I leaned closer, I realized with horror that it was just a hole. It was an opening into the neighboring unit, and behind it, filling the gap completely, was an unblinking eye. Celia's eye. She was watching me as I showered. I screamed, scrambling out of the bathroom. By the time I dared to look again, the eye was gone. I reported it, and maintenance patched the hole, but that didn't stop her. A week later, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar, my stomach twisted. Inside, nothing seemed missing, but everything felt touched. Then I noticed my bed. The sheets were pulled back neatly, the pillow perfectly fluffed, and lying across it was a single, long black hair. That night, I dragged a chair against the door and kept every light on. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of my doorknob rattling. Slowly at first, then violently, like someone was trying to force it open. Sat frozen, clutching my phone, praying the chair would hold. Then came her voice, soft, pleading, yet chilling. "Why won't you let me in?" The police were called again, and this time they warned her to leave me alone. For a while, the noises stopped, and I let myself believe it was over. But a few days later, when I was leaving for class, she was standing in the hallway, holding a small cardboard box. She didn't say a word, just stared at me as I passed. When I glanced back, she was still staring, lips curled into a faint smile. Eventually, after more complaints from other tenants, she was forced to move out. The landlord said it was for health and safety reasons, though he never explained what that meant. On the day she left, I heard dragging sounds in the hall. I opened my door a crack and watched as she shuffled past with her belongings. When she reached my door, she stopped, looked at me with those hollow eyes, and whispered, "I'll find another way." For weeks after she left, I still felt uneasy. Sometimes at night, I'd wake to the sensation of being watched, only to find nothing in my room. I convinced myself it was just trauma lingering from her behavior. But then, one morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in messy handwriting, with letters carved so deeply into the paper they nearly tore through. The note said only, "Walls are thin." I reported it, but no one could prove she had been back in the building. And after that, nothing else happened, at least not directly. Still, every time I hear a strange noise in a new apartment or feel eyes on me when no one is there, I think of Celia. I think of her watching silently through a hole in the wall. What unsettles me most is knowing how long it could have gone on without me noticing. How many times had she stood in my apartment while I was asleep? How many nights had she watched me through cracks and gaps I never thought twice about? Sometimes, when I close my eyes in the shower, I swear I can still feel her gaze pressing against me. Even now, years later, I still cover the bathroom mirror with a towel at night. I can't stand the thought of catching someone's reflection behind me, 'cause no matter where I go, a part of me is convinced she's still watching, waiting for the moment I let my guard down again. When my wife and I bought our first home, we felt like we were stepping into a dream. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it was ours. A small 2-story house on a peaceful street where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved when they passed. Everything about it felt safe. That sense of comfort lasted only a few weeks before we noticed something off about one of the neighbors, a man named Darren, who lived 3 houses down. At first, Darren seemed ordinary. He'd wave in a stiff, almost forced way whenever we drove by. He'd make small talk about the weather or ask casual questions. But then his interactions became stranger. He started showing up uninvited, standing in our driveway while I mowed the lawn, or walking into our backyard during cookouts. Once, he handed me a rusty kitchen knife, saying, "Thought you might need this." I laughed nervously, but inside I felt a growing unease. Things escalated after our daughter was born. At first, it was little things. We'd see Darren standing across the street late at night, staring at our house. Sometimes he'd linger for hours. Other times, he'd leave odd gifts on our porch. Cracked picture frames, burned out candles, even an old baby doll missing its eyes. My wife was frightened, but we tried to tell ourselves he was just eccentric, maybe lonely. That illusion shattered one night when I was half asleep and heard the baby monitor crackle. At first, it sounded like static. Then, through the hiss, came a man's voice, a whisper. Don't cry." I bolted upright, my blood turning to ice. I rushed into my daughter's room, but she was sleeping peacefully. No one was there. I tried to convince myself it was interference, maybe picking up a neighbor's radio signal. But in my gut, I knew better. 2 nights later, it happened again. The static filled the room, and then came the whisper, this time clearer. "Daddy isn't here right now." I ripped the monitor from the wall, my hands shaking. It wasn't interference. Someone was speaking directly into it, and the only person who had shown any unnatural interest in our family was Darren. The next day, I decided to test my theory. I walked past Darren's house casually, pretending to check my phone. Through his open blinds, I saw something that made my stomach lurch. On a table in his living room were several baby monitors, different models, lined up neatly in a row, and on one of the screens, unmistakable, even from a distance, was the image of my daughter's crib. I stormed home and called the police. They searched Darren's house, but when they arrived, the monitors were gone. What they did find was unsettling. A locked basement door Darren refused to open, claiming it was just storage. With no solid evidence, the police couldn't do much. They gave him a warning and left. But from that moment, every creak in the house felt like him. Every shadow felt like it was hiding his presence. Weeks passed, but my wife and I couldn't shake the fear. We bought new locks, installed security cameras, and tried to go back to normal. But normal never returned. One night, while taking out the trash, I noticed Darren standing at the edge of his driveway. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his head tilted slightly, a faint smile curling at his lips. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. Then, one night around 2 a.m., I woke to the faint creak of our front door opening. My heart pounded as I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed. I crept downstairs, trying not to make a sound. The door was wide open, the cool night air drifting inside. I searched the living room, the kitchen, every corner. Nothing but the sense of being watched pressed down on me like a weight. As I turned back toward the stairs, something on the wall caught my eye. In thick black marker, 4 words were scrawled across the paint. "Thanks for the invite." My grip on the bat trembled. I searched the house again, every room, every closet, but there was no sign of forced entry. Whoever had been inside was gone, and they'd left that message as proof. We called the police, who once again questioned Darren. He denied everything, and without evidence, they claimed their hands were tied. My wife wanted to move immediately, but we couldn't afford it yet. So we stayed, though neither of us truly slept after that night. Every sound became amplified, every creak a threat. The cameras never caught him directly, but sometimes we'd see strange distortions, as if someone had quickly stepped out of frame. A few weeks later, my wife noticed something chilling. Our daughter's baby blanket, the one she slept with every night, had vanished. We tore the house apart looking for it, but it was gone. The next morning, we found it neatly folded on our front porch, clean, as if freshly washed. That was the moment we realized Darren had been inside again, not just walking through our living room, but stepping into our daughter's nursery. We begged the landlord to let us break our lease, and eventually we scraped together enough money to leave. Moving day felt like an escape, though I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me as I loaded the last box. When we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Darren was standing at the end of his driveway, watching silently as we disappeared down the road. Months later, after settling into our new place, we tried to put it behind us. But one night, as I tucked my daughter into her crib, I noticed something that froze me in place. Sitting on the dresser beside her bed was a cracked picture frame, the same kind Darren had once left on our porch. My wife swore she hadn't put it there, and I know I hadn't. To this day, we don't know how it got into our new home. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories.